Hey guys, welcome back to the M3D Life podcast where we dive into everything in the world of golf. We have just had the PGA Championship. We are going to be diving into the PGA Championship recap in this episode. If you haven't seen my last episode, feel free to go back. Feel free to check out some of my previous episodes. Feel free to have a look at my predictions. That's what we're going to be discussing first, because I had some predictions that came true, and I definitely had some predictions that didn't for the 2025 PGA Championship at Quail Hollow. I put a little bit of money on a few different guys. I don't bet huge amounts, but I like to put just a little bit. Makes it a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting. And who did I bet on in the 2025 PGA Championship? Well, number one, Scottie Scheffler. Yes, get in. We had a win with Scottie this week at the PGA. Absolutely electric, amazing win. This was basically, I thought this was kind of a no-brainer in a way, because he just won. He was really rounding into form. The golf course suits him. It's kind of a ball striker's golf course. You've got to drive the ball really, really well. And he played pretty solidly all week. We will be getting more into Scottie. Let's have a look at a few of my other predictions before we dive into that. One of my predictions that did not come true was Justin Thomas. Very disappointing week. Some huge names missed the cut, JT being one of them. I thought he would have a really good chance this week. It seemed like he'd been playing really well, rounding into form, and he'd obviously won there before and had won multiple PGA Championships before. So really a surprising week for JT. Clearly just didn't have his best stuff, and it seemed like it was definitely a golf course that would punish you if you weren't hitting the ball how you wanted to. Another of my predictions, Bryson Dechambeau. I feel like it was an up and down week here. We will get more into Bryson. Close call. I do feel like he's going to get a major in 2025. I really hope he does at least. Kind of feel like he deserves one with the way he's been playing. Super, super consistent. But let's dive into the actual results of the PGA Championship. Scottie Scheffler, such a dominant performance. In the end, it was a bit of a, well, in the end, it was actually a little bit of a roller coaster, to be fair, through the week. He was solid through the week. You know, there was a lot of players moving up, downs. There were some low scores out there, and there were some very, very bad scores out there too. So it was pretty surprising. It felt like things could really turn on a dime. It was really hard to predict, but it kind of just felt like Scottie Scheffler, the inevitability of it. He was just playing so, so good. He was just playing kind of smarter golf, safer, just better strategy probably than anyone else, but just hitting the ball better. His misses are so much smaller than anyone else's, I feel like. Yes, he had a bit of a rocky period on Sunday, didn't have his best stuff, posted around of level par and was over par going into the back nine for the day. And it was getting pretty tight. The lead was down to one shot with Jon Rahm. Jon Rahm looked like he was making a serious charge. Scottie looked like he wasn't playing great. And then Scottie Scheffler just did what Scottie Scheffler does. Hung in there, hit quality shots, made birdie at the right time. And just a very, very, very impressive week for Scottie. I thought it was absolutely amazing seeing his reaction on the 18th tee. It was a little bit of a bipolar-ish reaction, I guess you could say. Some tears, some real emotions coming out. And then also, you know, this, throwing his hat aggressively on the ground, getting pumped up, going back to Ted Scott for the chest bump. It was pretty incredible to see that out of Scottie. I feel like we don't see a huge amount of emotion out of him, and that was really, really interesting. I feel like he probably won a few more fans over this week. he certainly won me over a little bit more this week. I was always a Scottie fan, but I was so glad to see him showing a bit more emotion. I feel like if you really listen to most people who talk about Scottie Scheffler and who have known him through his life, they say, he was actually a very angry player, but, pretty fiery, a bit more like a Jon Rahm. And we obviously don't really see that. Scottie Scheffler has talked about how Ted Scott, his caddy, keeps him, very, very muted, very engaged, very in the moment. And, that's great to see and great for his performance. But as fans, we want to, see a little bit more passion, see a little bit more, whether it's ups or downs, disappointment, or just passion in the moment, wanting to win, having that desire, having that competitiveness. And I really feel like we got that from Scottie Scheffler this week. It was really, really good to see. But let's move on and let's talk about Jon Rahm. I feel like overall, it was a pretty good week for Jon Rahm. I feel like there have been a lot of unfair comments said about Rahm, and to be honest, this was a topic I was planning to touch on in my last episode, but I actually forgot. So we're going to talk about it in this episode. I feel like, everyone's been very, very critical of Rahm, of his performances in the majors since going to Live. He obviously hasn't performed in the majors how he wants to. That's fine. I think no one disagrees with that. But, he's performed really, really well at Live events. I don't think he has a Live finish outside of the top 10 in, however many events, which is, hugely impressive. That's probably about nearly 20 events, and he hasn't finished outside the top 10. And whatever you want to say about Live, with the, not as many players or lack of depth of field or whatever your argument is there, there are very, very good players on Live, and if you want to win or perform well and be up the leaderboard, you have to play well. So it's kind of unfair to say Rahm hasn't been on form or hasn't played well. He hasn't played as well in the majors, definitely, and hasn't performed, but it was really, really good to see him back up there. I feel like it's a name we've really missed from the golf industry recently. He's a big name, big player, entertaining guy to watch, brings in the fans, especially the Spanish fans, that get so, so, so fired up for him. When I've been over at Valderrama, when we have the Spanish Live event there, it's really, really interesting, seeing, obviously, he's a superstar over there. Him, Sergio Garcia, these Spanish guys, the Spanish fans are so passionate about them, and he gets a huge amount of support. But let's move on and let's talk about another Live player, Bryson Dechambeau. Interesting week for Bryson. Another good week in a major. Had a pretty good day on Sunday. Kind of came back a little bit in a kind of tied for second, I believe. Really good week, but I think he'll be a little bit disappointed over, he couldn't get a bit closer to Scottie. Personally, I would have liked to have seen that. Just would have made the finish a little bit more interesting for me. If we'd had a Bryson Scottie battle going down to the wire, maybe one shot in it type thing, or even if it went to a playoff, that would be my ultimate, finish to the tournament. What was a pretty good event overall. I thought it was a bit of a shame he couldn't get closer. It didn't look like he drove the ball his best, especially, on Saturday, when he kind of was dropping shots and, kind of missed a few fairways. At one point, you thought maybe he could get close to Scottie. He had to kind of birdie every hole coming down the stretch to, coming down the back nine on Sunday, but couldn't get it done. Just didn't look like he had his best stuff. And to be honest, I was trying to think, what is missing from Bryson's game, especially that Scottie has. Because Bryson's strokes gained off the tee, I don't know if you guys saw this stat, unbelievable statistic. Bryson DeChambeau, strokes gained off the tee is about 1.8 strokes this year in 2025. Now, to put that into context, he leads strokes gained. He's number one spot. The number two spot, Rory Mcilroy, at about 0.8 strokes, I believe it is, off the tee, strokes gained. Now, so Bryson has about double the strokes gained of the number two, and then third is Scottie Scheffler, and he has more strokes gained off the tee than both Rory and Scottie combined. That's a pretty crazy stat when you think, that's some serious driving of the golf ball, considering how long he drives it and how accurately he drives it. I am very fortunate enough that I have been able to watch Bryson Dechambeau up close. I might even do a future episode of the podcast just talking about, my experience with watching Bryson's performance up close. If you guys, would be interested in that, let me know. I've seen him testing out clubs on the range and just sat there and basically watched for, an hour at a time. And it is really, really interesting and very, very impressive to watch. So maybe I'll dive more into that in a future episode of the podcast. Let me know in the comments down below if you do want to see that content. But yeah, the bit I feel like was missing from Bryson's game, I think, was his approach play, his wedge play. I just feel like there were times he hit some unbelievable drives, bombed it so far down there, left himself, just a wedge, a short wedge, maybe 80 to 120 yards in that kind of range into the green, and the commentators are in disbelief how far he's actually hit the ball down there. But then he would hit this wedge shot to 30 or 40 feet. And you just think Scottie Scheffler just isn't doing that, is he? Like, when Scottie has a wedge in his hand, it just feels like at worst he's hitting it maybe 20 feet, but most of the time he's giving himself a really, really good look for birdie, hitting it inside that 15 feet range and giving himself a lot of opportunities. It just felt like maybe Bryson wasn't giving himself as many of those opportunities. Definitely could have picked up a lot of shots there. His putting's actually incredibly good. If you don't know, Bryson DeChambeau is an incredible putter. It was funny, he'd hit these wedges to 40 feet and then nearly hold these putts. And he's actually, I thought he, seemingly putted pretty well. Just looked like he needed a few more strokes gained in his approach play. Now, let's dive into Rory McIlroy. Rory McIlroy, not the best week for Rory. This is actually a prediction. I wouldn't say I predicted a bad week for Rory, but I didn't predict, a good week, because and my logic behind it was pretty simple. That he won the Masters and his focus has kind of been elsewhere. He won the Masters. He went back to Ireland, celebrated with his family. He was in New York, did the whole press tour, did all of that. Like, when you're doing that in the few weeks leading up to an event, I think he played 2 events between the Masters and the PGA. It just felt like, to me, his focus was a little bit separated, a little bit split, between some of those things, and that's perfectly understandable. I think it would be, what are we expecting him to do? Win the Masters, win the career Grand Slam, and not celebrate and not go home and not do all this stuff? Like, of course he's going to do it. But yeah, I just felt like it's difficult, to really compete when you've had that going on in the background. And I think if you look at the build up to the Masters, he was really, really focused. He was really rounding into form. He was really playing well. He was, competing every week or even winning every week. And it just felt like maybe not enough tournament practice recently, maybe not enough reps, maybe just, a little bit of time off, and that's fair. He's human at the end of the day. The weird thing about Rory this week was he declined any press during the tournament, which was a bit odd. It is a bit odd because in the Masters, he actually did press, and that was obviously successful to him. But for whatever reason, he didn't want to speak to the press this week during the tournament. His driver was deemed, trying to remember the terminology, deemed unfit for play, basically, because basically the face had gotten too hot. This is a pretty common occurrence with golf clubs, with drivers, and with how pros, it's something pros have to deal with, basically, is that their drivers get regularly tested to make sure they are conforming. Non-conforming was the phrase I was looking for before. They get regularly tested to make sure they're conforming to the rules. Now, that doesn't mean Rory's been using an illegal driver this whole time. His driver has been legal up until now. Basically, what happens over time, especially with the best players in the world and very, very long hitters and high swing speeds and fast ball speeds, is the faces on these drivers gradually get thinner. They gradually get worn down. They gradually get a bit more flexible and a bit thinner. And what that does is it increases the time on the club face that the ball is actually making contact with the driver, and that increases ball speed, which there is a certain limit to how much ball speed you can get for the club face based on the swing speed. So Rory's driver was deemed non-conforming. That's obviously going to be a huge, huge kick in the teeth because you've got major championship week, Quail Hollow, very, very important to drive the ball really well. And Rory obviously had found a driver that he was very, very comfortable with. Another important thing to note with pros and drivers is it's not just about finding like the model, the spec, the shaft, the loft that you're comfortable with. It's much more personal than that with these guys and their drivers. It's based on, that specific head. Like, there will be fitters out there on tour who build the exact spec driver exactly the same as Rory's or whoever's, and they'll start hitting it and they don't like it for whatever reason. Maybe it gives them different numbers. Maybe it just doesn't feel right for whatever reason. They don't like it and it actually comes out slightly differently, which is kind of a bit of a weird thing to say. So pros get very, very attached to their actual drivers, to the actual specific heads they use in those drivers. And when a driver is deemed non-conforming, it can take weeks, potentially even a few months before they really feel comfortable with another driver head again. So hopefully Rory gets that sorted, and I'm sure we'll see him back very soon and hopefully competing in the next major championship at the US Open at Oakmont. But let's dive into a name that is not so familiar, Jhonattan Vegas. I think it was a pretty shocking, almost revelation to most people this week that Jhonattan Vegas is even still playing golf. I don't actually think most golfers would even be aware he was going to be in the field for the PGA Championship this week. I know he played in the Masters, and I only know that because of one of the brands that I work with who were sponsoring him at the time. But he did win a PGA Tour event, I think a kind of lower PGA Tour event. So he does have exemption for a little while. And pretty impressive stuff this week. I thought it looked like he was swinging it pretty well. It was hard to believe he was, not going to fall away at some point, that, he was really going to compete down the back nine on Sunday. But pretty incredible week from a bit of a throwback name that we haven't really seen for a while in Jhonattan Vegas. So good to see him back. I would be surprised if we see him competing at the next few majors, but you never know. The guy's obviously playing some great golf and is an incredibly, incredibly experienced player. Now, guys, I want to talk about Quail Hollow, and I want your thoughts on this. I'd love to know your thoughts about this year's PGA Championship and Quail Hollow as a golf course and as a venue. I was a little bit skeptical in the lead up to this event, and the reason for that was because Quail Hollow normally hosts the Truist Championship, which was the week before, and it normally obviously gets hosted the same week at the same venue. So it didn't feel to me kind of at the start of the week like it was the build up to a major championship, because it was like, right, we're at the same venue, the same time of year, this pretty much the same players are playing in it. So I don't know, I was a little bit doubtful at the start, I would say. It's also not, it's an iconic golf course, but it's not, I don't know. I think before this week, if you asked many people to name, their favorite hole at Quail Hollow, it would be a bit of a struggle. As the week went on and you got more familiar with the golf course, I think, that 17th and 18th hole became a little bit more, kind of jogged your memory, I guess, of previous events. And, I thought that 18th hole was beautiful, by the way, with that creek running all up the left side. I thought, absolutely stunning golf hole, incredibly well designed, very, very challenging, very, very difficult, but just beautiful, beautiful golf architecture. I just feel like there are better venues out there potentially. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, what might be a better venue for the PGA Championship. One thing you do have to bear in mind when it comes to organizing major championship golf, or any tournament, any large scale tournament golf, whether it's PGA, Live, even, Corn Ferry events, whatever, is there's a huge amount more than just the golf course, more than just, what the golf course will be like, the design of it, etc., that goes into all of these things. There's so much. It's actually hard. It's unbelievable, basically, how these things actually get organized. So much that goes into it. You've got to have so much. You've got to have media buildings. You've got to have space for that. You've got to have spectator parking, park and rides, buses. There has to be infrastructure for roads in and out, of how traffic's going to be managed, like TV compounds, places for caddies, places for players to eat, to relax, to whatever. Like, there is so much, and that's before you even get into the budget, the money side of things, the negotiations, the sponsorships. All of that takes a really, really big toll, and hosting one of these events is no small feat. So I actually thought, in the end, the golf course actually held up pretty well. It wasn't a blowaway golf course in terms of players just going very, very low like they did in the 2024 championship at Valhalla, which got a huge amount of scrutiny. There were a lot of players over par, including Rory Mcilroy this week. It played pretty difficult, and it was definitely, a bit of a ball striker's golf course. I think especially coming down that back nine, coming down those last 4 or 5 holes, you really had to hit some proper shots. I remember when Scottie was up on the tee on 17, in my mind, I was just thinking, right, 3 shots he's got to hit. He's just got to hit a good tee shot on 17, find dry land. He's got to hit, good drive and a good approach, and the tournament's done. Like, it was done at that point. If he does those 3 things, and I thought after on 17, after he hit the kind of right side of the fringe and just rolled off the green, after that, I kind of felt the tournament was done. He just had too many shots to play with. He's too good a player. He obviously kind of overcut his tee shot on 18 into that rough, but was very sensible, pitched out, hit an incredible wedge shot, and was very, very conservative with the putt. I think he 4-putted the first time he won the Masters on the 18th green. I don't think he wanted any kind of really embarrassing moments like that this time. He kind of played it a bit safe, lagged it up there from 5-6 feet, just made sure he got that tap in, and what a winning moment it was. Big names missed the cut this week, guys. Big names. Justin Thomas, Phil Mickelson, many more players. Dean Burmester was playing in the field, who I've worked with, and it was, I was rooting for him. I was hoping he was going to have a good week. I think that just shows how difficult the golf course was playing. I don't know if you guys also saw the Phil Mickelson bunker kind of incident. That was pretty surprising. I think Phil took 4 or 5 shots to get out of this one specific bunker, which was, yeah, not like Phil Mickelson at all, to see him struggling out of a bunker. But it just shows how difficult it was playing. It was a little bit disappointing. We didn't have those guys around for the weekend. The leaderboard was looking a little bit ropey towards the middle of the tournament. I think it was good that we got some big names up there in the end. It was worrying to see the leaderboard at some points. It's a major championship, guys. You want big names up there. It's good for golf. It's good for viewership. It's good for everything. I'm not against a smaller player winning. You get these unbelievable stories of these guys, and it means so much more to them to win. But selfishly, I want to see the best players in the world at their best, competing in the biggest events. And I have to say, guys, it will be really, really interesting going into the next major championship, US Open at Oakmont. It looks like it's going to be really, really difficult. I don't know if you guys saw, they had a creator day recently, so there's been a lot of content coming out from the best creators in the game, and it looks brutally difficult, absolutely brutal. So I think it will be a really, really interesting test. I'm looking forward to seeing Bryson there. It looks like the rough's going to be so long that I think if he can have a really good driving week, he could do some serious damage there. He definitely has an advantage because everyone's going to miss fairways and he's going to hit it so far that, he's going to have just shorter clubs in. So he will have a bit of an advantage there. And I hope that he challenges. I hope Scottie and Rory are both up there as well. Let me know who you guys think will be the 2025 US Open winner. And another quick topic I want to touch on before we wrap this episode up is Scottie Scheffler and the potential for him to actually complete the career Grand Slam this year. Scottie has won the Masters. Obviously, he's now won the PGA. Needs the US Open and needs the Open Championship to complete the career Grand Slam. So he could, in theory, complete the career Grand Slam this year. It's a little bit hard to argue that he won't after watching him this week. I think he's got as good a chance as he's ever going to have. He's playing well. Golf courses kind of seemingly suit him for the rest of the year. So I think that will be really, really interesting. I do think Bryson will. I kind of feel like Bryson's going to win a major in 2025. I just feel like he's just doing all the right things. He's going in the right direction. He's, yes, there were a few elements maybe that weren't his best this week, but I think he'll keep working on those and he will, improve his approach play and other aspects of his game. He's definitely moving in the right direction. So it's going to be a really, really interesting year. I kind of feel like maybe you could see Bryson winning US Open, Scottie Scheffler winning the Open Championship, maybe. It's an early call. It's a bold call. Guys, I want to hear from you. I want to hear your comments. I want to hear what you guys think. Let me know. Thank you guys very much for listening to this podcast. If you could do me a massive favor, me and my team are working very, very hard to produce a lot of content. We've got some really exciting stuff coming out very, very soon for you guys on my YouTube channel. So if you guys can leave me a comment. Make sure you follow and subscribe on here, wherever you're watching this podcast, putting it out on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, etc. So let me know any thoughts you guys have in the comments down below. And thank you guys so much for listening. It really does mean a lot.